PlayStation 5 Pro support at last arrives for Space Marine 2, resulting in one of the more worthwhile upgrades I've seen on Sony's mid-gen console. It's a relatively simple improvement too. As of patch 1.5, PS5 Pro attempts to tackle two key issues in the base PS5 release. Firstly, it boosts performance in its 60 frames per second speed mode, and secondly, it addresses the at times blurry image quality in that very same mode. Developer Saber Interactive is pretty upfront about how this all works on PS5 Pro as well. Across both options, the 30fps quality mode and the 60fps speed mode, Space Marine 2 now uses PSSR to improve image quality. That replaces AMD's FSR2 upscaling method, which is still in place on base PS5, while PS5 Pro also pushes the native resolution on each mode higher. So, on quality mode, we now get a native 1080p to 4K range, with PSSR upscaling the result to 4K. And then, on speed mode, PSSR reconstructs a lower 1080p to 1440p range to create a 4K image as well. The big question then, is this transition to PSSR enough to make a perceptible difference in clarity in each mode? Especially with gameplay in motion, what's the advantage next to base PS5? And looking at the 60 frames per second speed mode, does PS5 Pro finally clear the gap to a smooth experience, or does it still fall short of the target? Let's find out. Before we kick off, a quick word on the state of the game on base PS5 today. The fact of the matter is that the 30fps quality mode always ran pretty well, but the speed mode struggled with a wavering 35 to 60 frames per second range of performance. Comparing patch 1.2, the version I tested in my original review 3 months ago, to today's patch 1.5, there's a respectable difference. The good news is we're seeing a 5 to 10 FPS improvement on base PS5 using the latest patch, and occasionally even higher. Due to the variable nature of combat, it's a real challenge to sync up both tests, but the comparison still paints a pretty clear picture overall. In short, Saber Interactive has worked hard since launch to squeeze PS5 for better performance. The 30fps quality mode was never such an issue. It was really well optimized for a 30fps target at launch, but this speed mode needed more attention, and so it's satisfying to see that happen. The net result is, those with a VRR supporting display will benefit from the new patch, though the range of base PS5's frame rate does sadly still slip below 48 FPS at times. Also, there's really no improvement in the game's more CPU bottlenecked areas. The battle with the Ripper Swarm at the end of Mission 2, for example, still hovers at around the 40 FPS mark, and even fully patched dips into the 30s at times. There's not much benefit to updating to patch 1.5 in this case. The final point here before we get to PS5 Pro testing is that despite the general uptick in performance elsewhere, base PS5 does not match up to Xbox Series X's performance level in this speed mode, retested here on patch 1.5. Regardless of the scenario, Xbox Series X is still the one to beat when it comes to hitting 60 FPS. To the crucial PS5 Pro testing next. The 60fps speed mode is in focus first, of course, being the one that stands to gain the most from new hardware, so let's kick off with an image quality comparison in that mode, base PS5 left, Pro on right. In my view, Space Marine 2's use of PSSR is a success on a similarly high level to Final Fantasy VII Rebirth's Pro update. It removes a distraction I had on the base PS5 version by allowing this 60fps mode to look much cleaner and clearer. In terms of raw resolution metrics, it's boosted from the 720p to 1080p range with FSR2 on base PS5, and now runs at a higher 1080p to 1440p value reconstructed to 4K with PSSR. To be clear, the core visual settings from base PS5 are unchanged here. Texture resolution, the draw distances for geometry, foliage, and shadow detail are perceptibly a match. The difference PSSR makes, however, as a machine learning upscaler, is much more impactful to the speed mode, and pays off in a huge improvement to the moving image. Even in static shots, where an accumulation of frames helps both sides to resolve a 4K image, PS5 Pro ends up with a crisper picture. Now, to be fair, the base PS5 holds up reasonably well, so long as the camera's held still, but PS5 Pro still manages to resolve distant plant detail more accurately. The greater Pro advantage, though, is in actual motion, of course. PSSR's handling of dense jungle areas in Mission 1 is truly standout, replacing the often mushy, blurred resolve of FSR2 as we run forward, with a crisper outline to each bit of scenery. PS5 Pro's ability to both generate more pixels at 1080p minimum compared to a bottom end of 720p on base PS5, and also its ability to upscale it more intelligently allows for this huge improvement. The grass, the mud and mulch on the floor, the detailing on reflections, and even the metallic grates of the battle barge all benefit in this move to PSSR. The downside is that it's perhaps at times over-sharpened in spots, notably on grass, and also those reflected elements in puddles. There is a trade-off then, but overall it's still a net positive for PS5 Pro in this mode. Looking at the speed mode's performance next, PS5 Pro nudges the reading even closer to the target 60 frames per second. This isn't an absolute lock at that top number by any means, especially once we're engaged in battle with multiple Tyranids, but it is a boost in most respects over the base PS5 reading. In comparing the two machines, both updated to patch 1.5, we're looking at up to a +5 FPS gain during the opening cutscene as we land on the battlefield. From here onwards, the delta widens even further to show a +10 FPS advantage on PS5 Pro in battle. At times it's even higher, though gameplay does admittedly become increasingly tricky to sync up exactly. Alas, it's also hard to ignore the lingering drops on Pro. We're still seeing lurches to 45 FPS, just as enemies emerge from their pods on the opening jungle planet. Also, while improved, we're still generally operating in the 50 to 60 FPS range during set pieces involving swarms of enemies, like this moment as Tyranids clamber up the sides of a giant pit. In short, all of this puts PS5 Pro more often at 60 FPS than base PS5, which is a big plus obviously. It effectively creates a more palatable range for VRR to work if your display supports it. But do expect to see drops where it falls outside the ideal 48 to 60 Hz range on Sony's hardware. There's one further caveat to speak on. It's an exceptional moment, but the handling of the infamous Ripper Swarm set piece in Mission 2 still struggles on PS5 Pro. Unfortunately, Space Marine 2 puts demands on PS5 Pro here that are not solved by a 45% boost to GPU power, nor the offering of PSSR as an upscaler. In facing a huge swarm of enemies, similar to the rats in A Plague Tale Requiem, PS5 Pro only ekes out a small performance gain over base PS5. The frame rate oscillates between 40 to 60 FPS, which is an improvement on the dips below 40 we had before, but it's not enough. This is far from a salvageable 60 FPS experience, and perhaps highlights the limits of the similar CPU profiles of each console. Sticking with the speed mode for a final test, a frame rate comparison to Series X also shows mixed fortunes. With both consoles updated to patch 1.5, Series X has a 5 FPS advantage compared to the new Pro machine. It's a pretty clear-cut advantage for Xbox here, though in battle, the results tend to favour PS5 Pro as we make the same run into the battlefield. Putting that aside, the speed mode is more dependable on Sony's new hardware, smoother in its overall frame rate and with a sharper image to boot, but it does have a few rough spots still to address. Switching over to the 30 FPS quality mode, the image quality gains here are less profound on PS5 Pro but still evident in side-by-side shots. Frankly, the FSR2 upscale method on base PS5 already produces a crisp, clear image here in rendering a dynamic 1080p to 1440p range that provides plenty of pixel data to work with. By contrast, PS5 Pro's push to a dynamic 1080p to 4K range in this quality mode, upscale to 4K with PSSR, is a great but less essential upgrade. Overall, PSSR is making less of an impact here compared to the speed mode. Even so, we're once again getting a crisper, cleaner picture using all the same data points on quality mode. The jungle, the battle barge, all of which sharpen up beautifully in motion. Looking at the quality mode's frame rate, it's business as usual on Pro hardware. We get a locked 30 FPS readout regardless of the situation, just as with base PS5 hardware. Impressively, this includes the taxing Ripper Swarm segment, which has enough of a performance overhead at 40 FPS lowest in the speed mode for reference to hold steady in this case with a 30 FPS cap. Overall, the offering of a 30 FPS quality option makes sense on PS5 Pro for two reasons. Firstly, it gives us a watertight 30 FPS lock, just as with the base PS5 console, meaning those not happy with the frame rate drops in the speed mode have a backup option. And secondly, by having a 33.3 millisecond render budget per frame, quality mode is able to push a higher resolution frame on average, within its higher 1080p to 4K dynamic range. The result is greater temporal stability, less shimmer on grassy elements, and less flicker on metallic meshes in the battle barge than the speed mode. All round, Warhammer 40k Space Marine 2 looks and runs better on PS5 Pro, with developer Saber Interactive's use of PSSR paying off in a more handsome looking game. Truly, it's the image quality upgrade, the clarity of its 60 FPS speed mode, that stands out most. Across long distances, the move away from the base PS5's FSR2 upscaler results in a more appealing image with a cleaner resolve. Meanwhile, the frame rate side of the Pro upgrade is a neat bonus as well, even if it doesn't 100% lock at 60 FPS. The advantage here will be most keenly felt among VRR display users who now have more frames per second to work with on average, but the drops to 40 FPS are still an issue during the game's Ripper Swarm sequences. Perhaps, as a compromise, a 40 FPS option on 120Hz displays should be offered to Pro users given it capably runs above that line. What we have on patch 1.5 though is still a solid upgrade, and even for those on base PS5, it's good to see Saber continuing to optimize performance over the launch build. But that's all from me today. If you did find this video useful or insightful in any way, feel free to like or subscribe, and don't forget to hit that bell for instant notifications as any new video lands. To get a high quality version of this video and many more, check out our Patreon at digitalfoundry.net, and to get in touch directly, you know where to find me. But from me for now, thanks for watching.